thing to say is we will be recording the session, not recorded just yet, but the sessions with the speakers. So if you don't want to be seen, you turn your camera off, or you turn your camera off anyway. And just to let you know, so we're going to try and record it in 3 parts. We'll do a session to record each speaker individually, and then we'll probably do a bit of recording at the session afterwards. So that's available, so those who can't attend today can actually see part of the discussion that happens afterwards. So if we ready to get going, my ably assisted by Mandy to say yes. So the first speaker is Keiron Brown from the Earthworm Society of Britain, talking about Earthworm Records. So if you want to introduce yourself and carry on.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, my name's it's not coming up. Sorry, I'm just looking for my presentation and it's not showing. Let me try something different. Could work like that. That's not going to work. Right, sorry, just bear with me. I don't really use Teams very often because it hates me and I feel the same back. This is part of the reason why. Wait. Can you see my, no, you can't see my window there. No.
You need to share first of all.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, but it's not giving me an option for the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
There we go, found it. Can you see that now, everyone?
Just coming up. Yes, UK, iNaturalist, Earthworm Data Analysis. Yes.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Right, well, I thought I'd start by introducing myself. My name's Keiron. I am the National Recorder for Earthworms, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. So it's my job to sort through all of the Earthworm records that are submitted through iRecord or any other platform. We get quite a bit from researchers as well, and make sure that they're up to scratch to be entered into our national data set. And we call that process verification, and that's going to be a big part of what I'm talking about today. So I was invited by Giselle to talk to everybody today because I put together an infographic based on some analysis, some just rough analysis that I did, and I shared it on social media. And it got a fair few people chatting. Some positive, some negative. So the first thing I kind of want to start by saying is whenever we talk about iNaturalist, I hear a lot this iNaturalist versus iRecord argument, and I think we need to put that to bed. So something that we need to do as a biological recording community is realize that these are 2 tools that thankfully now are working together, but they do different jobs, and I don't think it's fair or even productive to constantly compare them. So I use iRecord quite a lot for the recording scheme. It does a lot of things that I need it to do that iNaturalist does not do. But iNaturalist is a different tool, and I'd argue that it probably has quite a different audience as well. So I think we need to bear that in mind when we're talking about the issues that we have with iNaturalist or iRecord data. And it's not all about which is better. It's about making the tools that we've got work better for us as a recording and scientific community. So I also wanted to start with addressing what a biological record is so that we're all on the same page. It's the who, what, where, when at a bare minimum. But really, when biological records start becoming useful, it's when we know more about how they were collected and why that organism is where it is on that day. So understanding things like habitat data and etc. are really useful. Now, a glaring gap on iNaturalist is that it doesn't have the facility for a lot of that data to be captured. But that's fine, because a who, what, where, when is still a useful record for things. And it might be all that we want to achieve with iNaturalist. So I think this is a big difference between iRecord and iNaturalist that we need to bear in mind. And again, I don't think it's a fair comparison to compare the two. They're doing slightly different jobs. So going back to the earthworm data, I just want to explain how I've portioned it out. So I've only looked at the Earthworm data that is on iRecord. I haven't looked at any of the other data that I have in my data set. So this is less than half of, way less than half the data that we have in the UK. But the data on iRecorder, I've divided it into 3 groups. So we've got the data that's coming through the Earthworm Society of Britain forms. So these are tailored species-specific forms that gather a lot of really useful information specifically for earthworm data. And this is where we direct all of our earthworm recorders to input their data. And it accounts for the majority of the records on iRecord, over 5,000. For the purpose of this data analysis, I've discounted all of that data because these are trained up earthworm recorders. So I don't think it's a fair comparison to compare members of the general public or general recorders that are putting stuff through iNaturalist and other iRecord forms. The remaining data I've categorized as either iNaturalist or iRecord, which is other iRecord forms, so the general form, BioBlitz forms, things like that. And you'll see it's not a big data set. We only have 99 iNaturalist records that have come through to iRecord, and we only have 1,383 records that I'm considering for this as other iRecord, because I found when I was doing the analysis, I found records that had never come through the verification portal to me. So because of this, I've got another 353 records that I now need to look at. But again, I've discounted them for the purpose of this analysis. So the first thing I want to look at is the verification issue. And by verification, I'm specifically talking about species determination verification here rather than georeference verification. And when I looked at the iNaturalist data, what I found was the vast majority of it, well over 90%, I was unable to verify. And that's not really surprising, because earthworms are a group where you can't really identify them from live photos. They usually require looking at a voucher specimen or a really high quality photo that shows features that you might look at normally under a microscope, that enables you to reach species. So this isn't a big surprise, but the reason I want to highlight it is because there are a lot of groups out there that fall into that same category as earthworms. So there are whole groups like we've got with earthworms, and there are large proportions of some groups which will fall into this category. So it's not a big surprise, but that means that over 90% of the records that are coming through that I'm dealing with on iRecord, I'm having to say straight away that we can't accept this because it doesn't have sufficient information to pass the verification protocol that we've got for earthworms. One thing I found when I put this infographic on Facebook, not this one, but the previous one, is that the comparisons to iRecord came in, and people would argue this is probably the same with iRecord, so why are you pointing this out? But I want to point out here that it's not the same with iRecord. With the earthworm forms, where it's trained recorders, obviously the large majority of them are getting accepted, which again is not surprising. But if we look at the more general iRecord pathways of data coming in, it's the reverse of iNaturalist. We've got over 90% are still getting accepted, because I think people generally don't record earthworms unless they've got an idea of what they're doing. Whereas with iNaturalist, I think people will record anything and everything. When we look at that in a little more detail, only 1% of records passed our verification protocol, which means that they use the correct features, the correct ID guide to determine the species. 83% were not accepted because I was unable to verify them, so I didn't have enough information. But 16% of them were definitely not correct. So they'd been put through as one species, and they'd had sufficient agreements to then go through to iRecord as a research grade record. Now, in my opinion, 16% of records is quite high when we're saying something is research grade. I think the term research grade has connotations that this is a really high quality record. So I think this highlights the need to think more about how records for species groups that are more difficult to ID flow through that system, should they be scrutinized more by before reaching research grade than, say, a hedgehog or a comma butterfly record, because they're obviously things that can relatively easily be confirmed with a photo. So moving on and kind of sticking with this ID theme, the second issue that I think is coming through from iNaturalist through to iRecord is an AI issue. So when I looked at the species breakdown of the records that went through as research grade to iNaturalist, over 50%, over 60% were a single species. So we've got 31 species of earthworm in the UK and Ireland. And when I looked at my National Recording Scheme dataset, only 6.5% of the records are actually Lumbricus terrestris. So this is our biggest earthworm. But it's not the one that you most commonly come across. If you're digging in your garden, it's not the one that you're going to find the most common. It might be the one that sometimes people think they see, but there are other earthworms that can easily be confused with it, even though it's quite a large invertebrate. And when I've looked at iNaturalist, it looks like to me that iNaturalist is pretty much suggesting that Lumbricus terrestris is a species for the majority, if not even all, earthworms that have been put on the platform. And then obviously these have been agreed by people and going through as research grade. And that means that the AI is being trained that it's correct. So it seems to be going down a route where instead of the AI learning, it's being pushed more and more towards this. So I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this. I wouldn't be surprised if that percentage of Lumbricus terrestris gets bigger over time. So I think there's a lesson somewhere here as well about the AI and how we can better train it for difficult to identify groups as well. Another thing that I pointed out in the infographic that I shared was an issue with licensing. So with the Earthworm Recording Scheme, we're really passionate about our data being open. We're a previous Open Data Award, John Sawyer Award winner from the NBN for what we've done with our data on the Atlas. We make it all available at full resolution under at least a Creative Commons, if not a public domain license. And we also share all of our data with the members of ALERC, the Association of Local Environmental Record Centres, so they can be used on a local scale. Share them nationally with the NBN Atlas, and we share and Biodiversity Island in Ireland as well. And all of our national data sets also go through to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, where they're available internationally and they're used for all sorts of different research. What I've been finding with, and as you'll see from here on this diagram, although we share our data with ALERC members, all iRecord data is automatically downloadable from local environmental record centres, which means they can take advantage of the free verification service that the recording scheme is providing. And they don't all download that data, but they can. They can download it whether it's been verified or not as well. So they have access to that to use for their business and charitable purposes. What I found when I looked at the iNaturalist record licensing was that 15%, there must be a point something here because they haven't come out even, but around 15% had an open license, so either a Creative Commons 0 license, which means a public domain essentially, or Creative Commons by attribution license. And from the local environmental record centres perspective, that would enable them to use those records without any restrictions for whatever purposes, including data searches for planning and development. However, 84, so well over 4/5, had a non-commercial license applied, meaning that arguably they can't be used by LERCs. And I also have concerns about whether we could use them for recording scheme purposes if it's something where we're going after funding, etc. So we don't add any records to our database that have that kind of license so that we don't get ourselves in any trouble. because we are volunteer run as well, so it just makes the data management a little bit easier. And again, I'll come to what I think can be done about that later. Another issue that is raised by a lot of people, and I found it as well, is that recorded names are not recorded on iNaturalist all the time. Quite often it's a username. I'll be honest, for me, I don't feel that this is a big issue, because even if I just logged it as iNaturalist user, if I'm having to verify something from a photo, I know that somebody else is IDing that. So I'm not as worried about this as some of the recording schemes are, because I know it's a deal clincher for some as well. But I wanted to show the stats. 30% had a clear recording name, 70% didn't. But this isn't something that would stop me using the Earthworm data at all. Another thing I found was there is a problem with location resolution. So when I've looked at the resolution of the records, you can see the breakdown by resolution there. So 10 meters is the finest resolution, so that's really, really good. 100 meters is perfectly fine for the purposes that we use Earthworm Records as well, to be honest. Your uses get a bit more limited as you get up to 1 kilometer, and then 17 records, which out of 99, 4%. That's 17 records is wrong. I've copied that a touch wrong. Sorry about that. I'll get the proper figures later. It'll be about 4 records. It'll be 4 and 6 records. So 4 records were what I would term useless. So to 100 kilometer square, there's nothing I can do with that record. And to a 10 kilometer square, all I can really do with that is distribution stuff, and maybe some trend stuff where we're looking at things at a 10 kilometer resolution. And just in case anybody's wondering about other iRecord Earthworm records, when I had a quick look at that, 9% of them came in at 1 kilometer or lower resolution. So that's 1 kilometer, 10 kilometer, 100 kilometer. Whereas here it would be over a quarter would come in at that. So you're looking at 2.5 times more coming in at that lower resolution. And yeah, again, I'll have a suggestion for dealing with that later. So I did get 1 record though. So is 1 record better than none? Unfortunately, in this case, don't have a recorded name, but I can deal with that. He has done everything he needs to do. I say they have done everything they need to do. The record resolution came in at, the record precision came in at 2,064 kilometers, but the output grid reference was at 100 kilometers. So this was one of the useless records. So with the output grid reference that I'm allowed to use from downloading from iRecord, it meant that I couldn't use it. And I don't know whether that's because of the way that it was recorded with using Northings and Eastings rather than grid references, or whether it's because of restrictions on the record. It's also, oh no, sorry, it came out as 2. Came as a 2-figure grid reference. It was accurate to a 10 kilometer square. It also has a non-commercial license, which means that we wouldn't accept it into the recording scheme anyway. So it means that although 1 passed our verification protocol, it didn't meet it still wasn't accepted into the recording scheme. And one last thing I want to point out before I go to my recommendations is I've tried going into iNaturalist and sometimes trying to stop these records coming through by giving people information that earthworms should only be recorded to family level if it's just from a photo and they're not looking at the correct ID features. And we've got the text that I put there. Something that I found, and I've seen that other people within the biological recording community have reported, is that when they've tried to give feedback on iNaturalist, occasionally, sometimes, the feedback can be a little bit snotty, sometimes even rude back. And I think something that doesn't come across on iNaturalist is when you are somebody that works, that does a lot of work within a species group, sometimes your experience maybe isn't given the credit it's deserved. You're just another user. And the recorder for this one argued with me that the species is distinctive, and I've come back to that and explained that actually that's not the case. There is a very close relative of that species. It might not be on some of the public engagement literature, but it is one of the species that we have. It can easily be confused. You're looking at one segment difference in its with one of its features. So this is something that you really do have to count down a microscope. And then I've got another comment here where somebody's being quite pernickety. Now, it's water off a duck's back to me, but it's just something I wanted to point out, that I do sometimes feel like when criticism is made of iNaturalist, or when corrections are made on there, sometimes people can get a bit too defensive, when what I'm trying to do here is educate and make sure that data sets are accurate and of a certain quality. Right, so I just wanted to finish off with a couple of recommendations that I have for improving iNaturalist. First of all, I think what would really benefit iNaturalist is a difficulty rating for species. I'd be very happy to put this together for earthworms. It would be relatively easy because they'd all go in at the microscope level anyway, but some might even go a bit further. And if we could tag species that can't be identified by photos, so that when people submit those records there, they get a warning, that would be absolutely great. That would be my ideal. Species that can be identified from photos should either not get pulled through to iRecord, because we're adding to the bottleneck of verification, usually done by volunteers there, or they should require at least more agreements so that the system is filtering out. I think one agreement for species that require a microscope is actually a bit ridiculous, and I'm surprised that research grade is not more agreements to begin with. I think there's potential to train the AI for difficult species to see if it can be improved. So I'm saying that earthworms can't be identified by photos. That's based on current knowledge. If we train the AI for iNaturalist by going out and taking live photos of specimens, then identifying them so that we've got a proven ID, we can train the system better. And I'd be really interested to see if that could help us actually improve the number of species that we can identify from photos. I'd love that evidence, and it's something that actually some French researchers that are working on earthworms in France, obviously, approached me about iNaturalist when I was at a conference there earlier this year. I think we could make it clearer to users what the implications of their license choice actually means, so that we encourage more open licenses. So that I'm not sure I agree again with verifiers spending a lot of time on records that they can't use. If they've got non-open licenses, restrictive licenses, I'd rather not see the record and waste my time. And finally, I don't think records at 100-kilometer resolution should even bother going through to iRecord, because again, you spend time verifying it and then you realize that it's pretty useless at the end. So that's all I wanted to say. I think I'm maybe a little bit late. Sorry, Giselle. But yeah, I'm happy for questions whenever we're doing questions or comments, or I can wait to the end when the other speakers have been. I wasn't sure what the format is.
Thank you, Keiron. No, if people have got questions now they want to ask, that's great. Is anyone? Chris? Yeah, go ahead.
Was that do I get first go or not? I'll dive in.
Your hands up.
Oh, there you go. No, just well done, Keiron. Yeah, I mean, you raised quite a lot of concerns that I've sort of spotted with some of my stuff. The tachinids are in many ways a bit easier to do than worms. There is a portion.
Chris.
Well, there are a portion of the species that are readily identifiable from photos, and I do, with yours, it's a tough ask. And I think, yeah, this issue of the AI being trusted, sort of beyond what we know it can achieve, with their pool of learning being corrupted by poorly identified photos. And I've had similar, where I've had species that I have corrected the identification of, And then other very willing non-experts have come in and then confirmed the wrong identification again and again and again, so that my expert ID is lost. And I've inquired, and there is no sort of concept in iNaturalist of an expert that can overrule a pool of peer novices. And that is a problem because, like you say, I mean, we know species that are impossible to ID, and we would downgrade that perhaps to just an earthworm, or in my case, to a genus, perhaps. But then if you get constantly overruled by very well-meaning but poorly advised, members of the public who just keep going Lumbricus terrestris, because it's a pink worm,
And its common name is the common earthworm, even though it's definitely not the most common. In Scotland, it's pretty rare now. So I don't blame the users, because they also don't know that I run the recording scheme.
No, exactly. I mean, there is also another aspect that I come across quite a lot, which is geographic constraints. There are none. So I get a lot of my tachinids identified as Architas spur, which is an American genus, and they're just not. You just don't find them. In consequence, on the other side, I've seen American species identified as Tachina grossa, which doesn't occur in America either. So it's not just a one-way flow that we get the American stuff. It also goes back that they get theirs badly identified by European material. so there's all sorts of funny issues there. But it does seem that the AI is very proud of their AI. And they do seem a bit reluctant to tweak it and do things with it. And I would urge them to try to take on expert advice and to try and put some limits into it. Sensible sort of sense checks. Anyway, there you go. I'll shut up now.
Well, no, I agree, Chris. And I just want to add to that I think to train the AI, we're going to have to be honest about this as well. It's going to require funding. It's going to require a project. For me to go out and do this would be a lot of effort, a lot of time. So this is not something that we can rely on volunteers to do. I think because of the engagement, it's very fundable, but we would need iNaturalist on board, allowing us to do something behind the scenes that is.
And the problem is that you could train it, and then it could untrain itself as more if people still identify Lumbricus terrestris if they put it in as their default identification is Lumbricus terrestris, then you could find the AI would drift out again as it gets more biased.
Well, I think it's definitely going out of control, because the worse it gets, the more it goes polar. I'm hoping that if we could bring it back, it might stop doing that. But you're right, the second you stop feeding it images, it might drift out again.
Yes, very much. Anyway, there you go. That's my bit.
Thanks. Tony Price.
Hi. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with anything really. I do wonder whether our problem is in this context of the conversation is that they probably didn't expect people to be recording things that weren't normally seen, and they were looking to encourage people to see the things that are obvious, the things that the general public sees as wildlife, and therefore invertebrates that hide under leaves or logs were never really thought about properly, and that's probably as a consequence. I've had experience of my work being redetermined, and I often will go and check the profile of the person. I've had experience of people in Germany and Switzerland determining things of mine, and I look at their profile and go, yep, you're much more qualified than I am. I'm quite happy for that. And that's something that, of course, the members of the general public may not even consider. It's not in their purview to even think about that way of doing things. So I think, there's some forgiveness in that sense of the way it's constructed is to get more data, not necessarily better data, and more common data to level the playing field of our apparently biodiversity rich islands that we have loads of information on. So the AI problem is a problem. I don't disagree with that. And I've also found that that sometimes it thinks I'm not in the right country, and that's where the misidentification comes from. And I've done recording, for example, in the States and in the West Indies, and I make sure that it knows that's where I am before it starts to ID the photos. Because on the app, it does that. You can do that thing of saying, I'm normally in Britain. And so you can get, yeah, okay, well, we'll only think about the English things and the English names. And there was one last thing. What was it that Chris was saying? Oh, maybe I'll think of it later.
Okay, well, you come back if you pick.
Yeah.
Lisa, you had your hand up as well.
Thanks, Giselle. And thank you, Keiron. That was a really excellent presentation, and really appreciate the work you did pulling together those figures and starting to scrutinise them to give us a bit more substance for talking about these issues, which, you know, we've raised sort of anecdotally before, but this really paints a very clear picture of what's going on, and it's really helpful. I first of all wanted to say that we're really committed to address these issues, and I think the package of solutions you've set out is really interesting, and we'd be keen to work with you and this group to look at how we might take that forward, and some of it we could potentially do, you know, unilaterally in the UK. You know, some of it will require iNaturalist sort of buy-in at the international level, but you know, I think that iNaturalist already has such numbers in terms of the engagement that it's eminently fundable. And I really appreciate your comment, Keiron, that let's not, you know, play iRecord and iNaturalist off against each other. Let's just look to see we get them both working to the best of their ability within their particular niche. And so we're really keen to do that. I did want to ask you, of the solutions that you put forward, which do you think, from your individual perspective, is the most urgent?
Well, for Earthworms, it's probably sorting out the wrong records coming through, but for the recording sector, it's definitely the licensing, because my opinion is we record to better understand nature and make evidence-based decisions, and I think the licensing thing is getting in the way of that. I mean, ruling out the records for use in planning, obviously with earthworms that really doesn't matter, but with EPS, etc., that these are useful records that are not going to be taken into consideration. So my personal opinion is that and it's such an easy win. It's such an easy thing to fix if the way that they select their license, or if the default is open. I understand though it's not that easy, because the way the UK recording sector is set up is very different and unique from the rest of the world. So this is maybe a very UK focused problem. So I am aware of that, but yeah, not that the LERCs not being able to use the data is detrimental to the sector in my view.
Thank you. And I think that's something we can find a solution to, or several solutions to. You know, we are able to contact iNaturalist users, we're able to run campaigns, produce educational resources, that sort of thing, you know, subject to having the funding and the skills to do so. So, you know, we can certainly start aiming to work towards that.
Great. Thank you. Patrick, let's take Patrick's question and then go on to Tom. So Patrick.
Thank you. Well, there were two things. Firstly, about the problem we have with the licenses, I think, is as a user, I'd be absolutely happy for any of the recording studies and the local record centres and all those sorts of people to use it. If my picture was good enough that I was a semi-professional photographer and I was putting it onto iNaturalist to try and get identifications of what I've caught, and it ended up on the front page of a magazine because it had an open license, then I would probably be fairly upset and think they should be paying me for it. And so whatever license thing comes through it needs to have that there are non-profit making commercial uses, if you see what I mean. and there are also very profit-driven commercial uses, and there needs to be some separation within the licensing system for that. The other thing I was going to ask Keiron is whether or not you'd looked at the traditional projects on iNaturalist, which I've been using a bit for a few different species. It allows you to ask, basically put in your own form to ask for certain details, and people have to particularly come back to do that. So I've been using it for wax caps and asking people to sort of say how slippery the top is, or give dimensions of the stem, or what the habitat around it is. So those sorts of questions, which potentially gives you a bit more filtering ability and the ability to prompt people giving records to you to what was the microscopic features of this thing. Oh, hang on, I've got no idea. In that case, it can't be added to that project, and do the filtering a bit more in that way.
Yeah, I'm not a massive iNaturalist user, to be honest. I go in and try and sort out the earthworms every now and again, until I get a bit frustrated of doing the same thing again and again, or I get kicked out of iNaturalist because it thinks I'm a spam bot. So I wasn't aware of that, Patrick, so that's good to know. And I'll take a look at it. I'm not sure whether it will be worth setting anything up for earthworms, because what I don't want to encourage people to use iNaturalist for earthworms at this point until we have a species that can be ID'd from a photo. But on your point of licensing, I think what you said I completely understand, but I don't think there's a way around that, because the licenses that are used, they're already defined Creative Commons licenses. So I don't think you can separate out LERC use from.
Sorry, Keiron, you can set your own license to be different for the observation to the photo, so you can really tight. So what we want to try and encourage to do, and we have been working with iNaturalist in America, and they're looking at it, is trying to make the default when someone signs up to be the most open license possible, and it's something they're aware of and it's working towards. But in the meantime, we need to do more about encouraging people to know it's there, how to go to their settings and change it. So
no, I was going to come to that as well, Giselle, but for separating LERC stuff from other, what you said was more commercial, we can't do that in the licenses. But I'm glad Giselle has confirmed it as well, because I was going to say that I believe, but as Giselle has confirmed it, that you can set separate licenses for your photo and your record. But the fact that you didn't know that means that it's not as clear as it could be then. So again, I think there is some work to do around that, because I think people would set their license data very differently from how they would set their photograph. I mean, personally, I'd be really happy, even if I didn't get paid, if my photo was on the front cover of a magazine. So if anybody is here from BBC Wildlife and wants a blurry picture of an earthworm.
Well, there is also the issue with photographs. There's the issue that you don't have to send a high-res copy. I mean, if it was going to on the front of a magazine, you would want for a nice high-res photo, but just to submit it to the AI, it could be actually very low res, and it just needs to be discernible in the picture. So there are ways around that.
Okay.
Can I add something in though as well? So I'm working with butterfly conservation on a project called Supporting Science, which is all about getting more verifiers on iRecord. And we're training up people who are essentially new to butterfly ID, and we're going to train them up on really distinctive species. So like iNaturalist, we're trying to address the verification bottleneck for species that maybe don't need an expert. And I forgot where I was going with that. Oh yeah, part of that training course, I've got these ID quizzes where they look at photographs of different species and say what they are, or and I got all of those photos from iRecord, looking for photos that had a non-commercial use, because we may charge for this course in the future, or a Creative Commons by attribution license, and not a non-commercial. If it's non-commercial, I couldn't use it. So I used all of them for that. So I think the more open all of this data is, including the photographs, the more it will be used. Sometimes maybe for evil in terms of the really commercial things, but mainly for good.
That's pretty. Thanks, Keiron. Time is against, so we need to move on. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Okay. If Mandy